Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In our final conversation with Dr. Dan McClellan, we're going to talk about a little bit more about the New Testament this time. We're going to talk about where did the wise men come from? Could it have been Iran? We'll also talk a little bit about the rich man in the eye of a needle. Dan's got some really interesting takes on that. And I will ask him if he agrees with Trevin Hatch if the Pharisees were actually friends of Jesus. You won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out.
Let's switch gears just a little bit.
Okay.
You told me that you were teaching a class on the birth of the devil. Is that right?
Satan in the Bible, yeah.
Satan in the Bible. There's a woman, I want to say her name is Kara Cooney. Does that sound right, at UCLA?
That is an Egyptologist.
Yes.
Yes.
And because I'm pretty sure that I even watched it one time, but I haven't watched. I need to watch these things multiple times to maintain them. She's written a book or a thing called "The Birth of the Devil."
Okay.
And basically, what she has said is, and hopefully I'm not mischaracterizing her. Kara, I would love to have you on, though. I'm going to come to LA and come talk to you. But basically, there was no real devil, especially in the Old Testament, and that the birth of the devil came about kind of as a reaction to, well, all the Zeus and Moloch and all Baal and everybody else, we're going to consolidate them into a single devil, and that became Satan essentially. What do you think of that argument?
I think that is not entirely off base, but a little. I don't think that all of those figures are being consolidated, but I would agree entirely that there is no entity whose name was Satan, who was the leader of the evil
Lucifer.
spirits. In the Hebrew Bible, the serpent in the Garden of Eden is nowhere identified as Satan in the Hebrew Bible. Lucifer is just a caricature of a human king. Has nothing to do with Satan. And it's not until Greco-Roman period Judaism...
A human king?
A human king. So this is the king of Babylon. And so he's being...
Lucifer.
Yeah, so he's being rhetorically kind of, oh, look at you, you tried to exalt yourself up above the stars of heaven and the throne of God, and now you've fallen to earth. And in Hebrew it's Halel ben Shachar, which would be shining one, son of the dawn, or the planet Venus, the morning star. And Lucifer was just the Latin name for that deity. But it was a reference to the Babylonian king, just saying, oh, look at you, little Lucifer, and look what happened to you. But Lucifer's not the devil or any leader of evil spirits. And then you have, in the Greco-Roman period, you have the book of Enoch, which renegotiates Genesis 6 and the B'nai Elohim, the children of God, having children with the daughters of humanity. And it reframes those deities as fallen angels. And you start to see references to the good angels and the bad angels and their offices and their leadership. And so you see this idea developing of a leader of the evil spirits. And they're called Shemi Hazah, they're called Melki Rasha, they're called Mastema. They have about a dozen different names, and it's really around the turn of the era into the 1st century CE that Satan bubbles to the surface as the name, kind of the official name for this leader of evil spirits. And you do have like Baal. In the Hebrew Bible, they're referred to sarcastically as Beelzebub. That's how we kind of traditionally pronounce it, but that is a caricature of their name, because the title would have been Baal Zevul, which is something we find in the Ugaritic literature, Zevul Baal, which means Prince Baal or Prince Lord. Beelzebub means Lord of Flies. So it's kind of, it's an editorialization on the name.
Oh, wow.
And then in the New Testament, it's actually written correctly in the Greek. It's Baal Zevul in the Greek, but most translations just render Beelzebub because that's how we know that figure.
Oh, okay.
But Jesus talks about Beelzebub or Baal Zevul as the leader of evil spirits and as Satan. And so Baal, who was Adonai's competition in the earliest periods gets literally demonized and becomes the leader of evil spirits by the time of the New Testament. So you do have, as this leader kind of bubbles to the surface, a lot of the figures who are identified as prominent representatives of the evil spirits kind of get consolidated within that figure. So you get Satan, you get the devil, you get Beelzebub, and a handful of other references that turn into this entity named Satan by the time of the New Testament. So I think there's a lot of truth to that, and I don't know how much of the way you explained it is accurate. But
Kara, I'm going to come to LA this summer. Because what I remember from the video that I watched, she had said something about, well, it's kind of a monotheistic argument. You know, the ancient gods, they weren't all good, they weren't all bad. Sometimes they were good, sometimes they were bad, sometimes they did terrible things. And then the Judo-Christian, even Islam, I guess, conception was God is the concept of all good, and so since we have one good entity, we have to have one evil entity, and so all of the bad characteristics of all these gods, in a way, it's like we have a monotheistic devil.
yeah, and I think that's one of the ways of accounting for the problem of evil that really becomes a big discussion in Greco-Roman period Judaism, because if you look in Isaiah 45:7, you have God saying, I make peace and I create evil. I, Adonai, do all of these things. And that's a way to kind of counter some of the dualism that they may have been experiencing, particularly in association with Zoroastrianism. Because in Zoroastrianism, which the Judahites in exile probably would have encountered quite a bit.
They're still in Iran.
Yeah. So you've got Angra Mainyu and Ahura Mazda as the competing entities, and that dualism may have, I think there's still a lot more work to be done on that, but may have kind of contributed to this idea that we can outsource the problem of evil to this bad deity, and then our deity can be entirely
because
good.
Zoroastrianism, they predate Christianity by a millennia. A long time.
Probably, I don't think that far, but probably, 500 or 600 years.
Okay, because they're one of the first monotheistic religions.
They talk about them as monotheistic, but I think more dualistic.
With a good God and a bad God?
Yeah. So, but it's complex.
Right. That's what every academic says.
Yeah, well, it's easier to, when we draw hard lines and then we get proven wrong, it causes more problems for us. If we could say, it's all very blurry, then we can't be proven wrong. But yeah, I would suggest that Zoroastrianism had other deities involved, and probably dualism is how it's mostly understood by scholars. But that may have contributed to this idea that, hey, we can use this guy and we can just outsource all the problem of evil to him, and that can be the bad deity. And then we've already accounted for how they went from good to bad. God created everything evil, but they decided that they were going to, they fell because either they refused to worship Adam, which is what the life of Adam and Eve says, where Adam is in the image of God, which is the way you referred to a divine image. And so the angels were expected to worship God's image. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. And they end up getting kicked out of heaven and falling. And so they become the demons. They become Satan. So we can account for how things went from all good to now we've got the bad side. And then we can say they're responsible for all the bad. So it's a way to account for the problem of evil that is probably influenced by things going on in Babylon, maybe Zoroastrianism, maybe Greco-Roman thought as well.
There must be an opposition in all things.
Well, yeah, that's that old chestnut. Yeah, exactly. That reflects this rationalization that it's not all a compound in one. It's got to be there's got to be opposition.
I just love how these conversations bring up stuff that I had not anticipated. Have you heard, since we're on tangents, here's another tangent, that the wise men were that visited Jesus were from the Zoroastrian religion.
Yeah. So the word that refers to them, magos or magi,
Right.
Most likely refers to astronomers or astrologers, people who were wise because they could read the signs in the heavens. They were educated in that. And from the east, the Iranian associated wise people would be the most likely candidates. So
Most likely.
I think so. A friend of mine named Eric Van den Eyck just published a book on the Magi, which is like literally 4 or 5 months ago, which is a great book that talks about the tradition and how it developed and how it likely originated. But I think that the author of the text probably intended for their audience to evoke that image of these wise, probably Zoroastrian or some other Eastern astrologers who are so tapped into the natural world and what's going on that even they can see the signs are just written all over the place that Jesus is coming. And it's also a way to kind of denigrate Herod by having people from the east who are not even Jewish, and Herod's supposed to be Jewish, coming and saying, we saw the signs in the heavens, we know that the Savior's going to be born, where is he going to be born? And they go, go check and find out where he's going to be, because he doesn't know. Right. And so they go look it up and say, oh, it says it's going to be Bethlehem, so they take off. And so the foreigners know more about what's going on than even Herod, the king, who's supposed to be Jewish, knows about what's going on. So it's also a way to kind of thumb the nose at Herod, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've even heard that there is a tomb or something, monument for the wise men in Iran.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know. I haven't heard about that.
No, I've heard that there's one in Germany and there's one all over the place too.
I thought you were going to say Herod, because we do know where Herod's kind of tomb was.
Yeah, no, that's in Israel. Are you going to visit there?
I don't know. I don't think it's on the schedule.
It's not on the schedule. I want to come on. Can you get like a lifetime pass to go hang out with Daniel? And
I don't know if you can afford a lifetime.
Because I think that would be awesome. But yeah, I've heard. They even have named him Balthazar.
Oh yeah. I'm sure there are different traditions that have different names.
I've heard there are like 3 or 4 different traditions of tombs of the wise men, but I've heard one was in Iran.
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. All right. Well, I know I need to wrap up. I may have to get you for another interview though, because I just love these conversations. I could go on forever. But you did one. I had seen a video that talked about the rich man and the eye of a needle. And I posted about it on my Gospel Tangents Facebook page, and I got a little pushback from some people that were like, no, that's completely wrong. And then you did a TikTok on it. And so can you talk about that parable, the rich man and the eye of the needle?
Well, it's where Jesus says that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. And there are a couple different ways to understand this, but one thing that has become pretty popular these days is to suggest that the eye of the needle was the name of a gate in Jerusalem that was really small, and for a camel to go through, it had to be stripped of all its gear and then shuffle through on its knees, which is just ludicrous. That people would be like, oh yeah, let's use the gate where we have to take everything off of our camels, and they're going to shimmy through on their knees because camels are happy to do that. And that's helpful. That's so ludicrous. There's never been any such gate identified, found, anything like that. That is a tradition that comes from many, many centuries later.
But isn't it in our LDS manuals? Or at least it has been. Maybe they're changing it.
There have been a lot of things in LDS manuals. But yeah, it's really just hyperbole. It's really just Jesus saying, not happening. Because
rich men are not going to heaven.
Because of how corrupt and corrupting wealth is. However, at the very end, the disciples say, well, who then can be saved? And Jesus says, with God, nothing is impossible, which kind of leaves the door open a crack, saying, look, it's impossible, but nothing's impossible, wink. And so another argument is people say, well, the word for camel in Aramaic is really close to the word for rope, so it's really saying for a rope to go through the eye of a needle, which I think is just kind of trying to soften the rhetoric a little bit. But these rereadings are attempts for people who, like money, to try to make it sound like Jesus wasn't being as condemnatory toward the wealthy as the author really has him being. But yeah, that's those are some of the ways that people renegotiate the scriptures to try to make the ideas fit better with what they would like them to be saying.
I'll have to do a link to your TikTok video.
And we've also found other Jewish texts that talk about both elephants and camels going through the eye of a needle as a kind of hyperbolic way of saying impossible. So it is something that we find in other texts. So it's most likely exactly what Jesus was, the author is having Jesus say.
Okay. You just opened the door.
Got to be very careful with the way I say it.
I got two questions here. I'm
Yeah.
trying to decide which one. Here, we'll finish the eye of the needle first. So we're when we talk about the eye of a needle, we're talking about just a regular needle with a thread and it's
now,
impossible.
obviously, anciently, their needles were a little different. But yeah, the idea is still, that's a tiny little hole. There's no way a camel's going through it.
Okay, and so we are condemning the rich, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The Gospels are not very happy with the avarice of the wealthy. So, yeah. But again, you have Jesus at the end with the little wink saying,
nothing's impossible.
Yeah, with God all things are possible. So.
Right. Okay, so the other question I wanted to ask, and especially since Trevin's a good friend of yours, I've gotten some feedback from some, I'm going to say, conservative type scholars. Trevin, one of the big points that he made in my interview with him was that Jesus was much more friendly with the Pharisees than tradition has made. Do you agree with that?
I think that, the way that we read the New Testament, the way the New Testament was also written, these are approaches that are condemning the Pharisees probably more than they needed to be. Now, as I kind of alluded to in my previous answer, the gospel authors are the ones who are having Jesus say these things, and they probably had different positions on the Pharisees. And for instance, John is notorious for being rather Judeophobic, maybe even anti-Semitic. But yeah, there's a lot of danger in talking about the Pharisees as this wicked group, because they're not, and Jesus seems to be friends with many of these folks, and the Pharisees are where we get rabbinic Judaism from, which is where we get contemporary Judaism from, and so being anti-Pharisee is pretty problematic from a contemporary anti-Semitic point of view. There's a wonderful new book. I cannot find anything. There it is. Wonderful book that just came out called The Pharisees, which is an edited volume, a collection of papers on the name Pharisee and a lot about the history of the Pharisees, their relationship to rabbinic Judaism, their portrayal in the Gospels, that I would highly recommend for anyone wanting to learn more about the Pharisees and why their representation in the New Testament should be taken with a grain of salt and should not be taken as an accurate representation of this whole group as the villains. That's really a later framing, and the way that we talk about it today is even more problematic probably than the way the New Testament authors went about it.
So we should, instead of saying someone's being Pharisaical, we should say you're being a Sadducee.
I would prefer neither of those, but yeah, the whole idea of using Pharisaical as this judgment, I think is problematic, and I know at least within biblical scholarship, we are really fighting hard against that.
All right. Well, cool.
But yeah, I think there are problems with treating the Pharisees as villains, and so it's probably better to just omit that from our lexicon entirely.
Well, is there anything that we've missed that you want to share? Any books you're working on, stuff like that?
I think I already mentioned the book that I'm working on. I don't know if that was before we started recording or after we.
Well, go ahead and mention it.
Okay, I am working on a book on how the Bible negotiates the representation of God. And so negotiating how we think about God is not only something that happens when people are looking in from outside the Bible. The biblical authors themselves are looking back on the traditions that they're inheriting, and they are negotiating with those traditions. And so the conceptualization of God is changing in the Bible as well. And so it's going to be a book for a popular audience that will discuss how the God of the Bible changes as the Bible progresses, and as the needs and the perspectives and the rhetorical goals of the biblical authors change throughout time. And I'll start with our earliest recoverable concepts of deity in the Bible and go down probably to the Trinity, which will be a lot of fun to write about.
Wow. I will have to have you on. So, all right. Anything else you want to give a plug for your YouTube or?
Oh yeah, you can find me on a variety of different social media channels. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube as @McClellan, MAKLELAN, and I've also got a Patreon, patreon.com/McClellan. Now that I'm doing this full time, I actually have to promote myself, which I'm awful at, but
I hate it too.
Yeah, but that's where I've got some incentives for helping to support my goal of being able to democratize access to the scholarly study of the Bible and religion, and also combat the spread of misinformation about the same. And it's been wonderful fun being able to do it and being able to interact with all kinds of different folks from all over the spectrum of belief and non-belief and all over the place. So.
Do you get a lot of pushback from conservatives?
Yes.
Yeah.
More so on Twitter than on TikTok, but yeah, I've got the DesNets are not happy with me.
Oh wow!
Which is how I would prefer things. And so, yeah, Twitter's probably where I get most of my pushback. But yeah, it's. But you know, I think that I don't remember who said it or what exactly they said, but somewhere along the way, somebody said something about measuring somebody by the quality of their enemies, and. So, I don't know what that says about me, but...
I just remember one last question. Since your name is McClellan, we have to ask if you're related to William McClellan. He spells it different.
Yes, I don't think I have any relation whatsoever to any of the McClellans from church history. When I was in the MTC, I had a lot of people who were like, so you're from Mexico, the colonies? And there are evidently McClellans down there as well, but I don't think I'm related to any of them, not by name or by blood. Because my paternal grandfather's name was Wagner, and McClellan is a name that I inherited from my father's stepfather, and so I've done a little bit of the research on that, and it seems to go back to Scotland, only a few generations back. So
that sounds like a Scottish name.
Yeah, and I've done a little bit of research on some of that history, and it goes back to some fun stuff with William Wallace and.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and our crest is and motto is a trip, but but yeah, I don't know much about my my actual paternal
Well,
lines.
now that you're a family history guy, I am too, so I will be happy to help you, especially as a repayment or something.
Yeah, I would appreciate that. I'm going to need a lot of help.
I'm good at Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, that sort of stuff. So.
Oh yeah, I'm terrible at it all. I just did the 23andMe, and so I have a slightly better idea of where some of my ancestry is from.
Roots Tech is coming out. It might be out. This video might be out before or after Roots Tech, but you can get the free online thing, and you can watch them even if you didn't. Even if this is after, it probably will be. So, all right. Well, Dr. Dan McClellan, thank you so much for being here on Gospel Tangents. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Dan McClellan. Dan, thank you for hosting me. It was great to get together, and I hope it's not the last time we get together. So I know you got some great classes coming up, so it's going to be a lot of fun. So check him out on TikTok, YouTube, and all the other places. In our next conversation, we're going to really change topics, and we're going to talk to two of Mark Hoffman's cousins.
My grandmother is the oldest daughter of post-manifesto polygamists, who are also Mark Hoffman's post-manifesto ancestors. And so anyway, I was raised on all of the beautiful stories of polygamy, of how our righteous ancestors lived polygamy, and I grew up totally believing in polygamy until I started studying it and had my mind blown that polygamy, I believe, was never ordained of God.
But you avoided all the pipe bombs.
The scriptures universally preach against it, and I felt inspired to share my journey.
Thanks for listening to Gospel Tangents. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe at gospeltangents.com or on patreon.com/gospeltangents, or you can watch entire videos at youtube.com/gospeltangents. I really can't do this without your support. I'd love to do it full time, and I need a lot more people that are willing to help me out. So I'd really appreciate that. So thanks again for listening, and don't forget to check out some of our other videos.